Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar on surviving Windows 2003 end of life. My name is Mary Jo Schweitzer, and I'm on the Oakland marketing team and the organizer for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to have Nathan Reynolds as our presenter today. Nathan is a solution engineer in Oakwood's infrastructure management practice. He's been performing migration design for applications leveraging the latest Windows Server, System Center, and Azure features. We also have Todd Porter with us today. He is Oakwood's line of business executive for the infrastructure management team, and he will be chiming in on some of Nathan's points. Before I turn it over to Nathan, I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar will be recorded. Should you need to leave us early, that's not a problem. We'll send out a link to the recorded webinar within a day or so. Also, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Feel free to ask questions as they come up via your question window to the right of your screen. We do have a decent mix of attendees, with some more business-oriented and some a little more technical. So should you have a very specific technical question, feel free to ask it, but we may not address it during the Q&A session. Instead, we'll go ahead and have Nathan follow up with you after the webinar. Without further ado, I turn it over to Nathan Reynolds.
Hello and good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the upcoming Windows Server 2003 end of life in this session entitled Innovation from Operational Necessity. So today's topic is pretty much going to be on, again, the upcoming Windows Server 2003 end of life, what you need to know, more from the business perspective of how you might handle a migration. Our topics today are the basically kind of an overview of who Oakwood is and what we do, and kind of our methodology when approaching migrations, in this case specifically operating system upgrade migrations. So we're going to take a look at these 5 pillars of strategize, identify, evaluate, plan, and transform. So really talking about the approach to a migration and what that looks like. So as far as Oakwood, we've been in business for over 30 years, over 11,000 clients served with a high degree of satisfaction. We are actively delivering projects across the United States and in several European locations, as well as South America. So included in that work are basically our data and analysis services, as well as our infrastructure consulting. So today we're going to be talking more from the infrastructure perspective, but included in that are kind of overlays all of these technologies. So also with specific application considerations, such as application development, collaboration technologies, mobile technologies, and desktop delivery services. So when looking at the Windows Server 2003 end of life, this survey was performed by Microsoft, delivered in Q1 of this year. And what we found is that there are about over 22 million estimated Windows Server 2003 instances still running out there. So with about 8 million of those here in the United States. Some interesting data in here is that there are still over half of these instances are still physical instances, so probably deployed prior to virtualization really taking off, or maybe still running a workload that has not been vetted for virtualization. 47% of those are virtual instances, so still a pretty healthy amount of virtualization there, but still a lot of physical instances. Also in that are SQL Server, about 1 in 6 servers still running SQL Server 2005, which is also approaching its end of life. And really we want to talk about, this, how to migrate these applications, how to move them off of the Windows Server 2003 platform and to some of these target platforms. So whether you're performing an operating system upgrade or looking at a service redesign, we want to talk about some of the strategies behind that. So another survey delivered in Q2 of this year shows kind of the operational awareness. So most are aware that Windows Server 2003 is approaching end of life, and really what that means for Microsoft is that end of support, that EOS. So basically support will no longer be available for Windows Server 2003. Most agree that that's a significant issue for their customers, and most are likely to upgrade in the next 6 months. Most of those will more likely to upgrade more than half of their instances. So some of the blockers to that, of course, cost and complexity, app compatibility, workload stuck on Windows Server 2003. So there are some real concerns there when you're running a line of business application or some other workload that hasn't yet been tested for that. So those are probably some top concerns, top priorities there. And the risk outweighing the benefits. So the risk of moving an application sort of outweighing the benefits. Many people still don't perceive the benefit of moving to a modern operating system. And while that's certainly understandable, one of the big things that this impacts is really compliance. If you are meeting a regulatory compliance in your business, you pretty much will not be able to do that on an unsupported operating system. Also a perceived blocker there is hardware. There's still a lot of hardware, primarily 32-bit hardware, that simply does not support a modern operating system, and that's also perceived as a blocker for many implementations. Many times, a roadmap to a service migration is more than just upgrading an operating system. You should really look to transform how you're delivering some of those services in order to add flexibility and decrease deployment costs. So ultimately, not only do we want to upgrade to a new platform, but we also want to think about how do we improve some of those services while we do that. So whether it's replacing hardware, moving to a public or hybrid cloud, changing some of the hosting patterns, or performing a hypervisor migration. Hypervisor migration is something that I want to call out here. If you're currently leveraging a hypervisor platform, doesn't matter what it is, this is probably a good time to evaluate what that platform is costing you, and does it make sense to also look at a potential migration there. Ultimately, we want to ensure that we're able to deliver as much value as part of this process. So taking a look at Oakwood's migration methodology here, again, comes in 5 platforms, with the first platform kind of encompassing all of those phases. So first thing we do is work to strategize, and that's really understand how your organization approaches these migrations, looking at the scope, quality, and timelines that are desired, understanding the expectations within your organization for that, and looking to align that with your delivery capability. So some of the other items here, as far as identify, evaluate, plan, and transform, we'll look at those more in depth. But really it's about understanding how your organization plans to migrate and how we can best assist in that process. So the first step, again, is strategizing. So really we want to document these foundational principles and understand how decisions are being made and what the decision criteria is there. So really this is broken down into 3 major sections. So we have the discovery process, and that's more of a high-level executive level assessment of size and scope. So is this a business-critical application? How many applications are involved? How many IT groups? That sort of thing.
I think the important thing here, Nathan, is that a lot of the folks we're talking to have a very large problem, and so one of the key drivers on the front end is to understand, is there a way to scope this down and get to something manageable, and how do we focus on the most important things? And that's really what drives the strategy session, is making sure you don't have to tackle every one of these in one project. We can go through and find ways to scope that down and make it more manageable.
Right, so understanding, kind of assisting you to get your hands around all of the aspects of the migration and really what that includes. So the next step in that is looking at filtering. So that's really looking to devise multiple scenarios of how to achieve those goals. So first of all, we look at what's being attempted, and then look at how we actually plan to achieve that, and all the multiple paths. I'm sure that Many of you on the phone here have been through more than one upgrade or migration process in your IT career, so that's kind of one thing, looking at how we're going to achieve that and make sure that we're using the right method to get you to that end state platform. We have a lot of experience kind of performing those analysis and understanding what scenario makes sense based on the resources you have at your disposal, the target platform, and any business level constraints. The next step is that platform strategy. So that's really developing the vision for migrating to your selected platform. So what your timelines, processes, any kind of operational considerations, whether you have any sort of SLAs in place. We really need to understand not only how to get you there, but how to get you there safely. So in doing that, we really work to build a strategy for workload deployment. So basically, which workloads are best suited for a local data center, more of a regional or global deployment. We take a look at who is really being serviced by that workload and what the best deployment option for it is. Any kind of budgetary numbers for creating or growing that internal infrastructure to accommodate those legacy workloads during migration. So if you're at or near capacity for delivering services, we really need to understand what the impact of doing an upgrade is. Usually, you're not just going to tear down your production systems and put up new ones, and the business is probably not going to be accepting of everything being down while you're doing that. So we need to understand, what available capacity there is for us to leverage. And then some of the capacity planning and strategy for the workloads that can and should be transitioned to a cloud model. So when we talk about service delivery models and cloud, there are really three options that probably most of you are familiar with. You have your infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So you'll hear me mention cloud a few times here. This isn't a cloud-centric application. There's cloud is certainly a tool in the toolbox to be considered during a migration, and we see a lot of customers thinking about leveraging a cloud deployment, at least through part of their service migration. So again, if you're at or near capacity, you may want to temporarily leverage cloud to work to deploy some of those, the public cloud to work to deploy some of those services and then bring those more in-house. So it kind of gives you a little bit more flexibility during the migration process. Also, software as a service. Many times we see some resistance to software as a service, but depending on, again, what service is involved there and what your delivery model is, don't be too quick to write that off. That can be some serious savings, especially when you think about the amount of resources that you expend in order to support that particular workload. So whether it's hardware support, technical support, those sorts of things, there's some potential savings in migrating to a software as a service platform. The next step is to sort of explore those unfamiliar targets or software. Obviously, anyone external to your organization is not going to be familiar with all the software platforms that you run, but during this migration process, it's important to understand any of those unfamiliar targets that are looking to be moved to a different platform. So again, understanding and aligning those expectations of capabilities. So the next step we look at is the identify step. So in this step, we really look to identify all of the different workloads running in your environment, and we do this by leveraging tool sets, which are either from Microsoft or other partners, to identify Windows Server 2003 and earlier instances. So Microsoft has actually gone the extra mile and provided their customers lots of identification tool sets that help understand what that workload looks like. So whether it's collecting hardware specifications on those physical servers, their utilization, performance, any other kind of support or software information, it's really easy to pull a deluge of information out of your environment. The problem is sort of sorting and analyzing that. And Oakwood has developed several processes for doing that.
I was reading a Forrester paper recently, Nathan, where they identified that fewer than 40% of IT organizations can actively report on what applications and what services are related to a specific hardware asset and certainly to the OS. So this is really a complicated problem for a lot of organizations.
Right. For many organizations, over the years, there's been a lot that's changed since Server 2003 has come out. In that time, there's a lot of organizations have developed sort of a technical sprawl, and it's important to look at solving parts of that problem when you're looking at a service migration. Again, understanding what's in your environment and looking to either upgrade or retire that, and we'll take a look at sort of what we do with that identify information here in another
I think that's a key point, too. I mean, having been in corporate IT for quite a while, you have to find ways to leverage the necessary spend to accomplish kind of the go-forward strategy. So it's not enough to just move off of 2003, but leverage the investment you're going to make in doing this and kind of spring forward the capabilities of your infrastructure organization.
That's right. So also in this step, really documenting all the versions of the different applications, the manufacturers that support them, any kind of service dependencies, really any data available that we have on the support of that product or how we can best move forward. And a lot of that comes from your organization. So understanding your organization's support life cycles for all the applications that it has deployed, all the business critical applications. So also part of that are sort of gathering terms, conditions of contracts, any of that other stuff that you have for hosted providers, any kind of application that's being hosted either on-premise or supported on-premise by a managed service or deployed in a third-party data center. So the next step is really to gather that organizational data to help drive that evaluation phase. So all of that relevant information about the IT budget, any kind of data center strategy, whether it's consolidated or regional, organizational design, again, how business gets done, whether it's done through a set of peer IT groups or a central IT group, and then solicit input from the broader organization about the priority and risk. It's really key to understand how these pictures align, how people view the priority with certain workloads and what the specific risk is. Key also in that is understanding the business continuity and disaster recovery approaches to each of those workloads. So understanding how your business is actually keeping those workloads alive. And then work with business leaders to document those key dates and constraints. So any kind of financial close periods, product release, seasonal peaks where changes are not allowed, that sort of thing is also key to understanding how that migration, how that transformation is really going to happen in your organization.
And I think we'll see later in our planning phase how we kind of bring that data forward and leverage that to develop a more comprehensive plan.
And then the data from that, again, drives that evaluation period. So we'll look at classifying and prioritizing some of those organizational factors. So things like ensuring audit compliance, assessing business risk, really understanding the requirements placed on those workloads and any of the services that are brought into scope here. Also aligning those functional owners, developing organizational dependency maps of which, which business units are leveraging which services, and again, identifying some of those macro level constraints. So that may be certain business concerns about various platforms. Again, we still see lots of questions whenever someone begins to discuss hybrid or public cloud, so ensuring that those requirements are met is key. Also, any kind of constraints around time, resources, or staffing for the organization, also very key to ensure a successful project. So then we look at the different options for each specific application or workload, and that can also include service tiers. So what we do with a specific application or workload, whether it's going to be retired, that functionality is moving to another application, whether we consolidate that application, bring together any applications with overlapping functionality, we'll work to migrate that application and redesign the services, how it's deployed, or upgrade that application, which is moving to a new platform. And then we have other hosting options for those applications. So whether it's a standalone service, again, you're probably not going to do more than upgrade an operating system for a single server service that's out there running. But for other more complex multi-tier services, you may look at leveraging other hosting options. So assessing the capabilities of the target platforms, it's also pretty key nowadays. Again, we talk about private cloud and some of those capabilities. So understanding the organizational maturity and the application compatibility for performing automation or orchestration. So how easily can we perform some of these application deployment scenarios and ensure a service-ready state when we're coming up with a new application on a new version, and how easily can we scale that out to meet organizational needs during any kind of go-live procedure. Again, performing any kind of gap analysis between your current utilization and any capacity for a future state. Doing a kind of an application-by-application analysis and documenting that. And then performing an assessment of the infrastructure, any kind of service provider contracts to understand that business case, such as SLAs, anything else like that. If you're working under an SLA, basically ensuring service readiness on a new platform should be one of your top priorities. The next stage is planning. So really working to create a governance strategy through program management. So program management also key through any kind of migration project. So really this is where we work to ensure success using Oakland's experience in these kinds of engagements. So again, we fairly experienced in this realm on a number of different large projects. So we've done this kind of thing before, ensuring again that we collect budgetary numbers for each phase, creating a timeline for each work stream, ensuring that everyone's sort of on the same page. Because remember, this isn't just an IT problem. This really affects the entire business. Everyone needs to be on the same page. And then working on the integration management. So really the communication strategy is key. We continually push that through all of our projects, understanding that the executive management understands the timelines and what exactly is planned for a migration, working on through the program strategy of ensuring that all of the work streams are correct and in order, minimizing any kind of business impact, and then training. Again, if you're moving to a different platform, it's really key to understand that you can support that platform. So again, whether you have an existing managed service or you're moving to a hybrid cloud, it's pretty key to understand your organization's capabilities of supporting that workload once it goes through its transition to a new platform.
And I think this might be the highest area of risk in a project like this. A lot of organizations, certainly the ones that we've been speaking with, kind of take an initial approach. This is an IT problem, an infrastructure problem, and really what we're seeing is that those projects where that is the approach at the onset, they're going to have less favorable outcome than the organizations where they recognize that this is a broader issue and it needs to be attacked across the entire business, and everyone needs to be front and center on focusing on this, because you can't address all of these issues without having the buy-in, the participation from all of the stakeholders. So we really focus on that.
And as part of an output from that planning stage, we really look to provide a hardware and software acquisition plan. So again, these kinds of migrations include some sort of license transition in most cases. If it's just Microsoft technology that we're talking about, most people have licenses that are covered under some sort of enterprise agreement and can easily transport. But in most cases, there's going to be some sort of hardware or service acquisition involved in this. Capacity planning, so understanding the organization's availability to assign resources, and then building out the test and training plans for each of those. Again, we want to try to focus on orchestration and automation where possible to ensure that we're moving as rapidly and we can scale out as necessary, and then delivering a sort of ongoing operational management best practices. So for all of these workloads that we're deploying, we want to make sure to understand how those are best brought into your day-to-day operational processes. So the last stage we look at is actually performing the transformation. Now that we've actually built up to the planning, we've ready to perform some of these migrations. Now we look at actually committing that migration. So during this process, again, I mentioned cloud is one of those things that can really deliver a lot of flexibility, and it's something that I really recommend most organizations look at for your workloads. Because again, this is a study that Microsoft commissioned. They found that roughly a little over $6 billion is going to be spent on Windows Server 2003 on-premise upgrades. So for your organization, that probably means a significant investment. We want to make sure that you're getting the most out of that investment, and that includes also delivering any kind of scalability or service redesign that we can deliver during that process to make sure that when you're upgrading from Windows Server 2012 R2, which you will be, that you're able to scale that out easily. So most customers, or about half of those customers, will involve some sort of hybrid cloud solution, working to reduce those migration and upgrade costs. And about a third of those will see the smallest migration costs, greatest degree of flexibility possible, because they're able to implement those cloud strategies. So again, not necessarily an all-in public cloud strategy, but possibly thinking about your services a little bit smarter in their localized deployments and really understanding and preventing server sprawl in the future. So one of the easier ways to sort of, from a technical perspective, get your arms around this kind of migration is through something like Microsoft System Center. So understanding through a single lens of all of the assets in your data center and your partner data centers are in a public cloud, and then understanding the workloads deployed to these clouds and how you can manage those. So again, we don't want to change, and this is, again, most of you may already have some component of System Center deployed in your organization, either for client management or server monitoring. So it's really key to continue those kinds of investments in data center management, but ensure that those investments also scale and move with you if you're going to a hybrid cloud or public cloud. So System Center and Windows Server natively offer a lot of advantages there.
So as for next steps, and we're right at time here, we'd certainly welcome you to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to work with you for an individualized conversation. We do have a formal offering of a data center workshop where we come in and work with you to kind of help build that transformation strategy. And if you do have a workload that is highly risky to you and you want to just look at what a POC might look like for that, we're certainly ready to help out with that as well. With that, we'll take your questions and spend just a couple of minutes working through a couple of those for those of you who are able to stick around. Nathan, the first one we have here says, I really like the methodology you have adopted. Can you speak to how well it works in larger organizations?
Yeah, so a lot of the methodology was actually built in our medium to large size customers, and it scales down pretty well. Again, smaller organizations are going to have less of a business consideration. Most cases, that really depends on the business and the workload we're looking at migrating. But for much larger businesses, we've scaled this out to very large deployments.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. We really kind of matured this methodology working with larger Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, and some of the smaller use cases you do have to maybe combine some of these steps because it's not as complicated to look at 30 or 50 servers as it is to look at 2,000 servers. So, I think the scale is a great question. Next one we have here says, we're having trouble securing funding in our organization to address this. How are companies convincing their execs to invest in a seemingly tactical back office issue?
So yeah, again, this isn't an issue that a lot of executives see. If your day-to-day business, IT operations are running fairly smoothly, there's no major problems, they're probably not that aware of some of the challenges that this kind of migration poses. So again, helping them understand that is kind of one of the things that we do. But from an internal perspective and having those conversations internally, the biggest driver behind that is going to be compliance. Any kind of organizational or regulatory compliance that you have to maintain, that's going to be called into question if you have any kind of operating system deployment in your environment that is not no longer supported by the manufacturer.
We're going to do just 2 more questions in the interest of time. Here's one that looks good. Can you speak a little bit about the advantages of Windows 2012 over earlier versions of the OS?
Yeah, so Windows, and this is something that when Windows Server 2012 R2 came out, a lot of people were not really jazzed by the release because they didn't understand some of the very foundational, integral upgrades and investments that Microsoft has put in the operating system. So for me personally, I like to say that this is probably the largest OS release, most significant OS release that Microsoft has done since about Windows Server 2000. They've really solved a lot of very common business challenges as far as keeping a service available, ensuring that that service is maintained throughout any kind of upgrades. A lot of disaster recovery and high availability options built into the operating system itself. So really, really cool stuff on the technology side that we'd be happy to discuss in depth.
We'll do this one last question and we'll let folks go. Is there any one primary qualifier that suggests a workload is better suited to the cloud than another?
That's a great question. So I think usually the kind of qualifiers we looked at are service delivery challenges. So if you're having to maintain a large hardware deployment or team to be able to provide configuration for things like load balancers and other high availability solutions just to deploy a single service or a set of services, that's really where we see the advantage of public cloud. Now, private cloud, again, is really preventing some of that sprawl. So when you're doing private cloud, you're assigning things like cost centers, quotas, and things like that for various teams. So you really help understand where your dollars are going from an organizational perspective.